If you want to support the Missing Witches project, find out how at missingwitches.com. Pre-order New Moon Magic, 13 anti-capitalist tools for resistance and re-enchantment.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch.
Be a witch. Be a witch. Be a witch. Be a witch. Be a witch. Be a witch.
You must be a witch.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Missing Witches podcast. Risa is here celebrating the summer solstice with our guests. Thank you so much for being here, author Lorraine Monteagut, podcaster, audio witch, Bex Carlos. We're so excited to be in circle with you both today and to have you interacting with each other to tell us about this word that's nebulous, like the word witch is, but in a different way. So let's start with Bex. I would love for you to introduce yourself, whoever you are today, wherever you are today. And also, if you could get into the word brujeria, and tell us not only what it means in your definition, but also what it means to you.
Yeah. Again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here. I'm Bex Carlos. If you are not familiar with myself or my work, I am a podcaster. I have a show called Tu Tía Bruja, which would translate to Your Witchy Aunts. And vaguely, and I work, the term bruja for me is, especially now, it's to rechannel this term that the Spanish used against all different traditions outside of their own. My family, we're from, it feels like it's getting so deep, like the core of who I am, like, who are you? We're from Mexico. I'm Mexican American, first gen, and it's the rechanneling of a word that cast my grandmother out of the pueblo that she lived in. She and her family always had this like word leaning over them that they were witches, and so they lived in the Barranca, which is kind of out in the outskirts. And interesting fact, Padre Toribio, the folk saint, died like on the land of what was my father's like childhood home, so it's always been this heavy word to kind of explain what is unknown. And it's also a way of demonizing people who practiced indigenous or any kind of form of the African traditional religions. It was a way of hiding tradition, faith in public. So that's sort of my definition of brujeria and bruja. And for me, using the term is a way of rechanneling what demonized my grandmother. I actually had this thought because I work in a lot of different types of magics, cannabis being one of them, because of the ancestral ties. And I was smoking a blunt and burning hell money. And I just had this thought of like, holy shit, I'm getting compensated now to do this work that feels right for me, that would have chastised my grandmother, and all she really did was light candles and pray. And maybe she worked with herbs, maybe she didn't, that's nobody's business, but like, was that really worth making her feel like she had to be kicked out of the town? So yeah, that's me. That's what I do. I'm an audio witch, as you mentioned, working in podcasting and different audio work. Yeah, that's who I am in a nutshell.
Awesome. So I am Lorraine, and thank you so much. I've been wanting to meet y'all for so long. I've been listening to Missing Witches for a little bit now. And I am one of the brujas that Bex mentioned, who are newly reclaiming this word. I am a child of Cuban and Colombian immigrants. I'm the first generation to have been born in this country in Miami. And I am reluctant to say that it has been an easy identity, bruja. It is wrought with all sorts of difficulties even today, even after I kind of made my work on this. So just to back up a little, I recently wrote a book called BRUJAS, The Magic and Power of Witches of Color. Came out in 2021, and I just recently celebrated the paperback release this month. So it's really exciting because I've seen the project from the early stages that started in my dissertation 10 years ago to this wonderful moment where it found its niche audience and did well enough to warrant going to paperback. So I did a little tour and celebrated that, and it was wonderful. But it also brought up all these old fears and insecurities around like the constantly evolving nature of the Bruja identity. And like Bex commented, Bruja has been historically a bad word. It was something that, just as there were the witch hunts in Europe and in the Americas, there were here in the United States, there were also parallel and even like way more egregious, terrible witch hunts across Latin America, the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, that were basically amounted to genocide because it targeted and demonized groups of people who would never themselves probably use the word bruja. My grandmothers, they wouldn't have used that word. That was a bad word to them because they in turn also demonized other ways of knowing. And that's the problem here, is that we internalize that kind of colonization, that colonizer mentality that would demonize anything different. And the number one thing we were told to do in this country was to assimilate. So we came and we were supposed to leave everything behind. Don't ask questions about what your abuelita did, in those rooms when she was calling on the spirits. Don't ask about that. And it's like the most interesting thing, right? As a kid, you just want to know that stuff. And they told us, no, you need to be American. And be American means like no cool stuff. In my opinion, in my 11-year-old opinion, I was like, but what about the ghosts and the spirits and all this stuff? So my reclaiming of the word for myself, I think, is just one way that a lot of us are doing it, and a lot of us are doing it in different ways, and it means different things to all of us. So it is a really complicated word to define. It's not one thing. It's not one tradition. I focus on kind of the new way we're using it, bruja, brujex, or brujekis, with the X at the end for the gender neutral term.
Or bruji is another good one that I really enjoy. That's gender neutral. Yeah.
Yeah. Bruji.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's paralleling the, Latin X, Latine, and we're constantly changing it and bringing up new words. And so I think that's really cool. The way that it's currently evolving, it's completely new. So we talk about ancestry and we talk about, like where we come from, but a lot of it is also brand new traditions that we're creating.
Can I just say snaps for everything you said? Because I feel like it's really hard to have like a really honest conversation sometimes about like brujeria, because it's so layered and it's just so many parts of who we are. Because just like brujeria, we are the products of colonization, and we are constantly being told we're not good enough, or we're constantly being told we have to adapt. And I think that is one of the best things about my practice, is that it has adapted and it's what feels right to me. Like, I do divination by iPod, canticomancy, and like, divination by music is something that's so important to me, because I realized that. Thank you. But I realize music has been so culturally important, so it's of course, me being a first gen, Mexican American, I'm going to figure out my own ways to do it. And I'm like, the iPod is it for me, and so you're so right. It's about like creating our own traditions as we go. And do you run into the issue where people tell you that you shouldn't use the term bruja, or because it's not like set in the old ways? And I'm just like, can't we let ourselves grow? Can't we let ourselves change what feels right for us? Like, it just seems like every part of our identity wants to put us in a box.
Yes.
Yeah,
for sure. I come up with a lot of complexities when it comes to like saying I'm just one thing. You can't see me on the podcast, but I am a Caucasian presenting person. I look as gringa as you can get. I was always like the little whitest one in my family. And that is one way that, this becomes complex for me, is that when I'm trying to, create this identity for myself, that is an in-between identity. It is, based on my ancestry, but it's not the same as my family who grew up in these countries in Colombia and in Cuba and who are still there and who couldn't leave. It's more privileged for sure. And I've had a lot more freedoms. And so it's this in-between thing. And I come up to the problem of on both sides. So on one side, this is not traditional enough. You're not like being authentic enough. Because the roots of some of these traditions are, deep and secret and occulted for a very particular, like, important reason, is that it was to protect the traditions. So, opening them up to the public or trying to, quote unquote, reclaim them is problematic to a lot of people who tried to protect them for so many centuries. But then there's others who are like, on the other end of the spectrum, like I don't even know. I'm trying to think of an example. Why are you the one to just be American? Why are you even trying to do this? You're here, and it's, everything is for everyone. So what's the point of claiming one thing? We can practice anything. So those who are gatekeepers, you can't practice this, and those who are like, everything is for everyone. And I'm kind of in between. I think that there's a respect that you need to have, and there are some close traditions that aren't for me. And every bruja or brujex or brujekis or bruji needs to find their own way against their own personal boundaries and their family's boundaries and their cultural boundaries. They're also very specific for each one of us. You're Mexican American, I'm Cuban Colombian American. There's different traditions, there's different ways we grew up. And so we all have a very individualized path. But I think we are also connected by that seeking, that magnetic kind of seeking motivation to figure out how to be in between in a way that feels good instead of bad, instead of like how we grew up, where it's like, you don't belong here, but you also don't belong here. You're not Mexican enough, but you're also not American. What are you?
Okay, I want to touch on two things that you said, because the gatekeeping piece, I literally was thinking about this last night, so divine timing, because it is difficult, right? Like, I'm with you. I'm in the middle, because some things do need to be gatekeeped. One thing that's been heavy on my mind is, did you know that that somebody trademarked protected by Santa Muerte and protected by La Santa Muerte? It's owned now. And it's
I write about that, actually. That's in the book.
Is it? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I have to definitely read the book. So it's official now, because before it was just like pending. There was a lot of back and forth about it, but like, it is live. They own it. And it's just very heartbreaking, because I remember when the podcast started, that was something that we covered throughout the show, because it was just, I knew people who were involved in like pushing it back, because they're like, this is for the people, like, you can't do that. And that's the thing with like anything legal, it's like you have to keep up with it. If not, eventually people get their moment to monetize it in a way that's not for everyone. And it's just, I don't know. Gatekeeping, I think gatekeeping in some way should exist, because it's just like people, but then medicine is for everybody. I feel like I work with Santa Muerte because the idea of like living every day like it could be taken from you is something that not everyone does. So it's like, are you really living, or are you just waiting to die? And so that's sort of like the approach of how I live my life. So I don't know, the way for me, the fact that someone could feel like they are entitled to that they own that, is just like, you're missing the whole point, I think. Maybe.
For sure. I don't know if you had Christy from Brujas Botanica on your podcast. But
no, yeah.
She dealt
know,
with, yeah, she dealt with she was very impacted by this trademark protected by Santa Muerte, because she created shirts that said that, and she herself, is a disciple of Santa Muerte and all this, and she was given a cease and desist. So that's what we cover in the book. But it's just one of those very many examples of how spiritual consumerism and capitalism come in and steal and own things that shouldn't be owned by certain people or any one person, really. And then to the exclusion of the actual like indigenous populations that from which these traditions came in the first place. So I do think that that's the line I draw when people ask me, so what's the difference between appreciation and appropriation? And it's, are you profiting off of something that's not even yours because you saw that it was popular? And in our law of America, the free market, anything's for grabs. So it's legal and possible for you to take anything if it's not already trademarked or claimed, even though it belongs culturally to the collective or to a very specific group of people who have tried to protect it. So it's just messed up. And I think that part of the Bruja path and what makes the Bruja movement a little different than the wider witchcraft feminism is that this is a central part of our discussion and our magic, and what we do every single day when we work our magic is that these concepts and these problems are the work. It's not about magic for magic's sake, to feel good or to. Personal empowerment is really important, but it's not just that. It's also cultural empowerment and reclaiming things for the people who have been the guardians of those things for so long, and making sure that we proceed with caution and respect, even as we make new traditions. So I do think that there are a lot of witchcraft feminists who are also doing this. Who come from European traditions. But the consumerized part of witchcraft that has become popular is not putting this at the forefront. Of course, what sells is crystals and they're sparkly. What sells are tarot cards and pretty art. And, that's all beautiful and nice, but it doesn't get to the root issue of the magic.
Yeah, and the magic is the most important. We are the magic, just as these traditions have been able to survive and thrive, like so have we. And so I'm glad that you've said that it's like we embody the magic. And I think that is what a lot of American and not that, like you said, there's a lot of people who are still very connected to their roots, who practice in a way that is honoring everything that came before them. But I think that's the thing is like in America, so many people are disconnected from those traditions, those roots, so they don't even know where to begin. They do start with the pretty and sparkly because they don't want to do that inner work. I also want to touch on, if you don't know Lisa Martinez, because I know that she was, along with Christy, someone who was making sure all the paperwork is in order. There were so many people on the back end, that were like really just trying to stop that. And if you haven't been connected, she's a curandera, amazing lady, just really working on putting the medicine out there for the right reasons. And that's what gives me faith, right? That there are so many brujas that are actually trying to help people do the work or help people get to the things that help them do that inner shadow work. Because sometimes it does feel very consumeristic. And, I'll see friends who are amazing brujics, just magic people, literally begging for their life, because they just can't get the resources that a lot of white witches with generational wealth can get. I have a friend who is fighting to get a tumor removed and has some of the best money drawing oil that I've ever, used. And I get it. Like, we go for the products and the people that like have this like large following sometimes. And I'm just like, followings don't mean anything if like they're not doing what they can with the power and privilege that they have. You know, that's something that I've been running into a lot. Do you ever just feel like you're playing the game to like get ahead and it's almost like exhausting? Like it's just like at the cost of getting your work seen and recognized, you have to compromise parts of yourself.
Oh my goodness, yes, all the time. So to just be able to, get a book deal, for instance, which is very like a mysticized process that's actually really simple, but they, it's all like market. It's how many followers do you have? Like, will you be able to, sell this book to millions of followers? It's a different world now where that goes first before substance. It's like the promotion before the thing that you have to promote, the cart before the horse, So I feel all the time this feeling of, do I still love this work? Am I still even doing it while I'm doing all this promotion? I've been in such a promotion phase the last few years. And that's why I feel a calling to get back to the creative work and to get back to the core of my practice quietly for a good season or two without the social media and all of that, because I need to remind myself like, oh, there is this root work that I still care about. It's still there. And I think that's what I counsel people when they come to me and ask me how to do work. It's very quiet and it's very personal at the root. And if you're not doing that first, everything else is a distraction. You'll be pulled in so many different directions. You'll feel competitive with others, which I think is really, it's really disappointing to see, especially like among the Bruja community, sometimes competition and like bad blood because people are doing quote unquote the same thing, which I think is impossible. Nobody's doing the same thing. Everyone's different. And there's plenty of room for all of us. And if anything, one of us doing something, opens paths and makes it more possible for others, right? So the competition that the market creates is just an unfortunate killer of creativity and of confidence and of this thing that drew us to our practice in the first place, which was a needing to reconnect with what was lost. And that is still there. That thread is still calling us. And it's calling each one of us in such a very specific, individualized, beautiful way that nobody can take from you. And the work is to get to hear that call and to respond.
That hit me in the feels. That was such an amazing response. Thank you.
Thanks for that. In fact, you sort of started, I was thinking about asking you this and you've started to answer it. So I'll interject as much as I could just sit back and watch the two of you vibe off each other all day. I do wonder, like we have listeners who are taking maybe their first step. Like, I feel like I'm called. I hear that spirit call. I know that I come from a culture or a generation, or maybe there was a grandmother, or that like, I feel like there is a sense that there was someone who knew this, who I'm making the like touchy finger feeling of like knew magic, like, or I had a grandmother who read tea leaves, but that's maybe all we have. Right. And particularly if you are from a culture that experienced the violence of colonialism and just being sort of totally ripped apart, your traditions, your culture, your relationship with nature violated over and over and over again. There's just this wound of like, how do I do it? And maybe the only place I go to try to learn it is Instagram. Like maybe that's all I have. What would you suggest as those first steps coming in quiet, but also first practices to start to connect with maybe that Bruja experience if you are from that culture?
Lorraine, would you please start? I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah. Sure. So yeah, I certainly don't want to come off as like, Instagram is only superficial. There's a lot of connection. This book wouldn't have been born without social media. That's how I met everyone. Every chapter is a different person's story. And we connected online. And so I do think that online communities are a great resource for beginner witches and brujitas. I offer in the book the altar as the entry point for anybody, no matter what tradition you come from, whether you know a child of immigrants or your family has been here for many generations. I think that setting up that sacred space for yourself is something. It's a physical manifestation of your individual connection to spirit, and I offer that because that's how I grew up. I always had altars in my home. And I naturally just created them as a child. But sometimes they were so simple. They were just a little rock that I collected on a walk, a little flower, you know, a journal entry. And so I think this is something that anyone can practice, is just making a physical representation of spirit. I think there's a lot of power in doing that. There's a lot of, you know, reclaiming of control in your life, of creating a space that's just yours, a sacred boundary that you can feel protected within when your life is in chaos, especially in those moments. So that's what I offer for the beginning, which is and brujas is the ancestral altar for those of you who really have this tradition that you feel disconnected from. So an altar doesn't have to be ancestral, but I do think if that's your aim and that's your entry point into this work and you're trying to reconnect with that, you know, start with what you have. Do you have a photograph of a grandmother? Do you have a practice that you heard about? Is there a book that is going to teach you a little more about a tradition that you're interested in? That's all for your altar. And can you speak to the dead, you know, through it? Can you, you know, communicate? Just start to open your voice in that way. It feels really weird sometimes if you've never done it before, to go and actually like vocalize what you want into the air to your ancestors. Just that small practice of letting your voice be heard by yourself, by your spirit community, is really empowering. And it took me a long time to even get to that point where I didn't feel weird or dumb, you know, just saying, abuelitas, ayúdame, estoy aquí.
I love your answer, and I want to kind of agree with you. I hope that we weren't coming off like Instagram has, because it's a portal. It's a portal, you know, like I feel like you get amazing things from it. But it also has its like toxic issues. And sometimes that is like keeping really talented people out of the spotlight, you know. There's amazing people there, you know, but I think Instagram is amazing for learning the basics. If you are trying to learn like, like my grandmother used to light candles, I want to connect with that. Learning the meanings of all the colors, you know, if you don't know that, basic herb stuff. I always just recommend that if you're getting information on Instagram, you should always just like double check your information.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and now there's so many, you can get books. And so Instagram is amazing because you can also like see what someone else's practice kind of looks like. And, you know, I think it's amazing to be influenced by other people. I think that that's a skill that spirit speaks to you. But I think where, you know, for me, like where it gets complicated is when you're exactly copying people. And I think that that is sort of an issue that social media creates. But altars, like Lorraine said, are an amazing place to start. I always recommend like starting to look up herbs and like plants and things that either had some type of family connection. All my work is ancestral, really. So I feel like for me, it was getting down to basics. It's like, what do I know about my family and the things that they use in their everyday life that I can incorporate some way in magic? And a book I want to recommend, it's by Laura Davila, and it's called Mexican Sorcery, Brujeria de Rancho. And it's amazing because it shows you that there are so many things that you can just do in your you know, from your household kitchen. And I think that that's the thing, is that sometimes witch consumerism makes us feel we have to get all of these things and have the most complicated arsenal of witchcraft. And that's not true. You know, you use what you need. You have a lemon, you have garlic, you have salt, you have whatever, you know, you figure out a way to utilize that to really bring the reality that you're trying to bring. And sometimes it is by like praying over it and asking your abuela, your tatarabuela, all of these people who came before you to help you. And sometimes it's asking the universe. Sometimes it's asking, I don't know, maybe you had a stuffed animal that we were very partial to as a kid that's now disappeared and you still speak to its spirit. I don't know, whatever connecting to something feels like for you, you know? And for me, it's my ancestors. For some people, it's the universe. For some people, it's deities. You know, it's just whatever calls to you.
For sure. I love that. What you said about Instagram being a good reference point and an inspiration point. But just like anything online, you need to do your own work and make sure you vet the ideas, because there's misinformation everywhere. So just make sure that you're also connecting to some really good sources. And this is where my academic self and my teacher self comes in. I'm like, where are your sources? You know, make sure you do your due diligence, you know, and if you're going to be a serious bruja, you know, you're doing that work as well. And I do think it's good to connect to anything that makes you feel like creative, that's waking up that creative energy inside of you. And we all have that. We are all creative in some way. I think to me, that's always been very close to spirit for me, is what are you creating that's so special to you? Creativity can take so many forms. And for me, it's always been the written word. So I journal at my altar and I write every time I'm there. But for others, it could be painting, or it could be things that we don't necessarily see as creative. It could be organizing a drawer. You know, it's it's the, you know, witchcraft has always been about personal power. It's empowerment. It's getting control and power back in your own hands. And I think it is always good to start with what feels good and feels easy, and what feels like yours. So I like what you said about Brujeria de Rancho, which is all about your home, your immediate surrounds. There's weeds that you could use outside for smoke bundles. You don't have to use sage. You know, sage has been misappropriated, over-harvested, taken from indigenous communities. So let's think twice before we use that. This is just an example. And maybe you use the Spanish needle that's right outside your yard because it's antibacterial, antiviral too. You know, it has cool properties and it's right there. It's for you. It's magical, you know, manifestation of the universe just for you. So I like that idea of just starting with what you know, what you have, and going from there.
I want to return to this notion of power and control because, Bex, I know something that's very important for you in your work is underscoring this, like the thievery, and we can call it appropriation, but the theft of marginalized witches and their practices. And I kind of want to throw this question to Lorraine, because you have a chapter in BRUJAS called White Witches. That's not accusatory. It's, you know, you're investigating your own, scare quotes, white passing and what that means. But I really want to know from both of you, like, what good allyship looks like. And specifically, Lorraine, why was it important for you to put this White Witches chapter in your book?
Oh, dang. So that's like the most what is it called, contentious chapter in the book, where I get the most comments. People either stop reading the book at that point because they're so offended. Yeah, or they're like, yeah, like clapping, you know, and like cheering for me. And I think I think I must have hit a good chord, and I must be doing something right, because I get criticism from extreme opposite ends of the spectrum. Like, why are you even talking about this? This should be a non-issue. Race, you know, should not even be an issue here. And on the other hand, I get, you know, the opposite. Why did you even think you could write this book? You're too white for it. So I have people saying, you know, you shouldn't even be talking about white passing. You are from these traditions, and you're completely empowered to write about this. And other people who will look at the flap of my book and see my face and say, I'm not reading this because, you know, a white person shouldn't be writing this. And I respect that 100%. And so but I am who I am, and I do think that I have a right to be here. And so that's what this very weird, complicated chapter is about. It's about the hard work that I did on my end in my practice to face the in-betweenness of my own Bruja identity. I tried to approach this very complicated topic, very controversial topic through my own personal experience. I think in rereading it, I think in some parts I do go into like kind of like a lecture-y tone, and I can't stand it, but please forgive me that. But I do still stand by the fact that people like me who are in the in-between, that's where our magic is. We have a responsibility to face these spaces where we're not invited sometimes, and to accept them. And our work is maybe to not reclaim so much as it is to unsettle what we think are neat boundaries, of belonging. And for me, I had to unsettle this neat history I had about my great grandmother doing her work. She was a spirit medium in Cuba, and she channeled African spirits. But she, like me, was, light skinned, and she in her life was racist. Just to put it bluntly, right? And so my reclaiming my tradition through her must involve like dealing with those issues. Is okay, she was taking from the Loa, she was taking from, which are like the spirits, the African spirits, from in Santeria, the Orishas, she was borrowing from these really powerful magics and making a living off of them. And am I doing the same thing? I would like not to. So instead of my reclaiming myself and like as like the descendant of this long line of witches and I have all this power, it's more like, oh dang, that I am the descendant of, complicated histories that meld together, the Spanish colonizer and the Afro-Indigenous, native to the countries where my parents come from. I'm somewhere in between those two threads. I am the product of mixing, and so are most of us, right? So power to me means just having my eyes open and seeing that clearly. But it's hard work. It's what we call shadow work, because it makes you come up to your baddies. It makes you have to deal with complicated emotions that don't feel good. It's like icky, sticky emotions. And I think it makes people feel icky and sticky when they read it, no matter where they're coming from. So that's the chapter that really, I guess, triggers lots of people.
Oh my God. I want to expand upon what you said, because people might not be able to see this, but again, I'm very like light skinned too. And I feel like it is the realization that we embody like both of the oppressed and the oppressor, because like we didn't get this light just out of, thin air. And
right.
That's a heavy conversation. And I don't know. It's what I feel like Americans and a lot of maybe Canadians too maybe don't understand is that it's such a layered existence, because there's, like you said, all of these things inside of us that we kind of carry. There's this saying that when you heal yourself, you heal 7 generations forward and 7 generations back. And there's a lot of inner stuff. Like sometimes my mom was the darkest person in her family, and just the things that she had said to her by her, because it's all this sense of like at sometimes othering other people for the sense of like, well, I know who I am, because we don't know where we come from. A lot of us could do ancestry tests and there'd be, what would come up would be so surprising. it's so weird that you can have like lighter skin, but you might come up with like 55% African, and you're just like, how? And it's because a lot of times people didn't want to talk about like what was there. I don't know a whole lot about the colonization process of Cuba or of Colombia, so you'll have to excuse me. But in Mexico, the caste system was like 16 tiers because they like differentiate, which I imagine it was all New Spain, so it would be very similar, if not the same. But 16 tiers from like, you are a Spaniard who was from Spain, but you might live here, you know, and then all the way to this is what you are here. And so there is all of this internal like judging of ourselves and other people and what is good enough and what's not good enough. And I think that that's just a curse that we have as, unfortunately, the product of colonization. But I think that since we are like lighter and we do embody a lot of these things, I think it is important for us to be in those spaces to also like expose things that still happen to this day. A lot of the theft and a lot of the toxic behaviors that people just feel like they're entitled to, and it's because of their privilege. You know, I hate to say this, but a lot of times white women, I would say it can be worse than white men, because white men have never really been oppressed in that way. So it's like they can yield over their power in a way that's more sharing. Whereas I feel like white women always have to like pull it back. It's like, but I want to be in control. I have to be in control. And that comes from a place of not being able to share their power. And I don't know, I'm a tarot reader at times. And I had an event where I had another tarot reader that was there who was a younger, like, white witch. She was very sweet, or at least it seemed so. And then her partner got a reading from me. And then later, because a witch always finds out, someone made a TikTok how she was doing her readings. And it was the exact same as how I was doing my readings. Like I typically use the combination of a tarot and oracle deck, but even down to the language she was using. And I'm like, you couldn't even move it around a little bit and cheat properly to not get caught. And I'm just like, you really thought I was that unaware? And I'm just like, if people are doing this in spiritual, in witchy communities, like, I just imagine how bad it is. And, you know, and I've worked in corporate America, you know, but it's just, it really kind of like breaks your heart. It's like, you should know better. You're supposed to be a spiritualist or whatever, you know? And so I think it is sort of like, we are meant to do some of this work to expose some of this because it is so prevalent. You in your book had to have a whole chapter about it, you know, like, this is happening more than we'd like to admit. And to kind of answer, like, what does a good ally look like? I feel like for me, right, if I can tell you that something happened and you don't automatically, well, what if, and you start what ifing and making excuses for the person, I feel like you are at least a decent ally. You know, you don't have to have it explained to you how to stand by someone who has had this thing happen to them. Because I think that that's the thing too, is that like white supremacy has taught us that there has to be all this evidence and proof and whatever, but it's also just like, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, maybe we should just say it's a fucking duck, you know? And so we have to do some of this unlearning too, and just at times to like trust our fellow witch, you know, to really stand by her and be like, I believe you, this happened. How are we going to like process the aftermath? Like, what does that look like for you? Do you need to just vent and get it all out of your system? Or do we need to do something, you know? And I feel like that for me is an ally, someone who is constantly in the trenches with us and is like an accomplice in how to undo white supremacy.
I approach allyship from a perspective of the person outside in the book. So how to be an ally. Like I'm thinking of myself even as an outsider, because I have been in spaces, and that chapter goes through that, where I was excluded and I'm told I didn't belong there. And I think part of being an ally is just accepting that, where you don't have consent, you know? I think it's simple. And like, even if you feel like you belong somewhere, it really is all about relationship. And if you're told you don't, then you don't, because it's a relationship, and that other half of that relationship is not there. So for me, yeah, I feel like I come from these places where I am different than somebody whose family was here for generations and generations, but at the same time, I am white presenting, and there are places where I am not accepted or invited. And I, knocked on those doors for the book. I didn't want to exclude anyone. So I knocked on some doors, metaphorically and physically. And some of them were shut, and rather than barge in or try to like write my way through it, I was just like, okay, I guess I'm not writing about that. That's not for me, So I think I offer, I think at the end of that chapter on white witches, like how to be an ally, because there's little rituals and practices at the end of each chapter. And my main theme there is consent. I think it's so important in every relationship. It's like the core of trust is, are we both in this, and there are some spaces where I did stand up for myself and I said, wait a second, this and this and this. And then people listened and, I was allowed to be there, and then we created something together. And certainly with the book, I didn't want it to just be my memoir, because I have such an individual specific path like everyone. So I tried to include as many people as possible. So every chapter is a different person's story. And that was consensual as well. So I think that's what it is to be an ally, is to like not overburden others by your presence, like, I'm here, let me in, it's like kind of annoying. It's annoying at minimum, and at the worst end of the spectrum, it could be dangerous, so, I go into, in the chapter, I talk about hoodoo and voodoo specifically with this, because they are African practices. And I think that's work for maybe another person and not me. So there are boundaries. And that's where I think allyship is all about, is understanding boundaries.
Yeah. And I do want to thank you for saying that, because it's true. Boundaries are so important, and there are spaces that we're just not allowed. And I'm actually like good for people for standing up for themselves and just being like, listen, you trigger me. Like, because that sometimes is what it is. We trigger them for whatever reason in their life experience. And I don't want to be somewhere that I shouldn't be, where I am going to upset people. And that is such a bottom line for me. That is sort of just like, I will not. I always ask permission. And I feel like that is sometimes what a lot of folks don't understand, is that we need to ask permission to be there. And like you said, if they're like, we don't want you here, being okay with that and not taking it personally, because it's not always personal. It's just like, we want to be able to have this safe space that we don't feel like we would have with you. Yeah. My thought is on it is, if I'm having these conversations with you, I've already like trusted you. Like, it's just like, and I appreciate the knowledge that white witches do bring into my life, because I have so many like friends who do really help me see and understand nuances that I feel like I don't understand. And it is important to have that buffer who can, in some ways, I always joke, be my fair lady. It's like, please help me like thrive in white culture, because I don't always get it. And she's like, yeah, no, we got you.
I want to pick up the word accomplice. I love that, especially in the context of witches, brujas, magic makers. I loved, you said earlier, Lorraine, that how do we get comfortable being in between, or how do we find a way to be in between that feels okay? And I love that, because that's not about how do we get into the mainstream. It's like, how do we own that we're not, that we're on this outsider path, and we're sort of on it together, sort of not, like we're sort of reaching out and celebrating each other's outsiderness. And I want to go further than allyship, I want to be a fucking accomplice. I want to be an anti-racist, anti-capitalist spanner in the works with other witches, I want to fuck that shit up and help give birth to something new. You know, I want us to be together for the re-enchantment and not for the fucking apocalypse. So what does that look like? Like, how do we call out that magic, that resistance magic, that accomplice magic? What does that look like from your perspective or your family or your culture or the top of your head?
That's so beautiful. I love that so much because ultimately, like, and I worry about this all the time when I talk about these topics, that I'm alienating somebody, because witches of all kinds are all outsiders. We're all called to this work because we didn't fit into the mainstream. And I hate seeing us, hold each other up as the enemy. And this happens with feminism all the time because, witchcraft feminism mirrors larger feminist movements. But I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to understand that joining together and making space for each other is where the magic is, even though it's hard and complicated. And I think it's just like any wounded animal, like we're when our defenses are up, it's just because we were traumatized in some way. And so when someone that's kind of like us or doing the same thing as us approaches us, we're just kind of like defense mode, and I think the work for me is to drop those defenses more and more and just be kind to myself and be kind to others and inviting as much as possible. Within limits, it's important to know what's dangerous and where you should have your boundaries, because of course this work, a lot of us are empaths, a lot of us are open and see and hear and feel so much more than just the material world. And so if we don't have our boundaries, we can get pretty fucked up. But, I do think my work in the next chapter of my life is to drop defenses and be open and make mistakes and be kind of like bumbly. Like we're not all poised and, we're not all like Instagram ready all the time. I ramble a lot, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing a lot of the time. And that's part of like the fun of it, is that we're all making this new thing. So we're not always doing it right. So let's just fuck it up together. Let's just, like you said, fuck it up together, like fuck up the system, but also just like fuck it up and make a mess of it.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I love the next project stage of my life is to be bumbly. I feel that so deep.
Yeah, because it's like going back to childhood, right? I do feel like I have a thesis brewing that like we're all our 11-year-old selves, or at least we like the same things that we did when we were 11. And if we can just show our 11-year-old selves to each other, we didn't care what the presentation was or like what the outcome would be. We were just like, hey, look at this bug, isn't it cool? And then we'd fall off a tree and get hurt and just scream and cry.
I regularly say that, but about my 8-year-old self, it's just like we've all become more feral versions of that 8-year-old self, but with disposable income now. The things I like now are pretty much the same. If I could have like Spice World just on repeat in the background everywhere I go, like, that would be amazing, but I don't. But, one day. I think that it's so important that we are having these conversations with our inner selves, because I feel like a lot of the work that we do is around making this world safe for that younger version of ourselves that really just needed, more love, more attention, what have you. I always just think about, I've been really interested in the mother wound, and, because a lot of our issues come back from our grandmother. And I just think about like the ways that we are healing our family lines and becoming accomplices to ourselves, right? Because I feel like a lot of us, how can we be accomplices for other people if we don't even know how to advocate and how to really fuck shit up for ourselves? Like, in part of being bumbly is making mistakes and maybe sending that risky text or like having that conversation that you've been so worried about, like, well, what happens if it gets weird? It's like, let it get weird, like, are you really even living in your witch experience if you're always just like, but what if? Well, just what if you do it? Like, I feel like I'm always the dangerous friend that encourages people to just, well, what if you do it? But what if you do it though? Like someone will be like, I'm really into pottery. What if I quit my job? And I'm like, but what if you do it though? But my thought is like, okay, but let's think about how to properly do it. We're not just going to quit. We're going to have a plan, you know? I always tell my friends, do not tell me your hopes and dreams if you're not trying to actually make them happen. Because if anything, I'm going to get frustrated with you because I'm the one pushing you and you're annoyed or something, you know, like, because I just feel like everything that I put my seeds into, like, so to speak, like, and I plant, like, they start happening. With like the podcasting and combining my witchy pursuits and interests and like my audio work that started 3 years ago. And I'd been like, all right, you have 3 years because that's the most you can have this domain for. If you can't do it in 3 years, then you're not meant to do it. And now I'm having opportunities to talk to other witches about like our work. So it's just like, do it, you know, what if you do it? What if you give yourself a timeline and what if you're happy? You know?
What if you're happy leads me to one of my favorite subjects that I really need to bring up. And that's, again, Spice World. What if you were happy? All of these things. One of my favorite subjects, and again, Lorraine, you have a chapter about this in your book, gratefully, thankfully. So I would love to hear Bex's thoughts as well. I think there's this misconception that, you know, anger is the only emotional path to resistance. And I want to talk about joy as resistance and joyful resistance. Can you bubble up with some joyful resistance?
Yeah. So kind of hopping on what Bex was saying about just doing something. I think it's important to just do things that you're called to because you just love them without worrying about the outcome too much. I mean, of course, we live in a world where we have to think about how we're making our bills and is this practical and all that is part of being an adult, unfortunately. But at the core of it, if you're not enjoying your life, I just don't think any of that matters. So I think if you've decided to live this life, this witchcraft life, this witchy life, it is already, its core is resistance, right? We're not doing this the way you've told us to do things. We're not going by the institution. So we must build it on what we love. Like what else is there, right? So we were drawn to this because we just love it. We're full of wonder for it. And so I think, especially for people whose families have been oppressed and have been kept from practicing their magic, have been kept from even communing with their families, have been separated from their families. And this is happening right now in this country at the border, you know, and we have a candidate for president who shall not be named from my state of Florida, who, you know, has built his platform on, you know, infringing on the rights of immigrants. And it's more important now than ever that we stand in our power through our joy and whatever that looks like for us, because that's telling them, like, you are not controlling my life. You know, there are things that I have to reckon with. There are realities, but I still have control over my love and what I love and what I do with my love. So what is that for you? For me, it is reading books and going out in my garden and keeping my bees and being with my animals and slowly making my family a new family that is built out of love and not fear. That is so hard to do. It's so hard not to be scared. So any moment, and it's okay to be scared also. It's okay that if joy doesn't come naturally, it's a muscle we have to learn how to exercise. So it's okay not to, if you're depressed, you know, I want to make that clear because I've been depressed so much of my life. But joy is something that builds on itself as you feed it. It just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And it becomes easier to feel the more attention you give it. And so I'm spending the summer chasing my joy. I have the great privilege of doing that after a few years of working really hard and working too much, I think. I feel lucky that I can take this time, and because I have it, I'm going to take it, because my inclination is to fill it with more work, because I'm a Capricorn rising. That's another conversation for another day. But I'm going to give myself time to just be out in a nice summer. I'm going to the Pacific Northwest where it's not hot. And I'm going to look at the water and look at the trees and see what comes. I'm not trying to overplan it, and I'm going to see like what creativity bubbles up. That's my joy this year.
I love that. And I really love what you said about like joy being a muscle that like not everyone is super used to flexing. And I feel like it's because so many of us like come from a place of like having to exist in survival mode. And you kind of said that like so many people are so, at least they're taken up, their lives are taken up by work, and they figure out more ways to like, oh, well, what if I can do this? And that does come from like a mindset of like having to really hustle and survive. But I also really recommend to people that if they find themselves in a space of doing this, it's hard to stop. I'm trying to be better about it myself, but the more that you stick to your relationship with money and that it's scarce and you have to always be like working for it, that's how it's going to be, in finding my joy and creating more time for myself. Like I've really been reevaluating my relationship with money. And if I tell myself, be a little delusional, is what I always tell witches, is like, just tell yourself that you have everything you need and that it finds you easily all of the time and opportunities come to you. Because if you don't change your mindset, you're going to continue to make it be that way. I think that witches, we don't realize we have so much power. Us bruji, sorry. I'm like trying to say brujitas and bruji. But, we have to really live the life that we want to live. And that is changing our mindset. So if joy doesn't come easy for you, figuring out ways to do that. If money doesn't come easy for you, figuring out ways to relax your relationship with it. I also just feel like anything that is worth having, you can't hold on to like tight, because it's going to kill the joy associated with it. And I think a lot of young people, millennials and Gen Z, is like they feel like the things that bring them joy, their hobbies, then have to become a way to make money.
Yes. And
it's such a damning space to be in. I stopped doing that. Like with my hobbies, if I don't enjoy it anymore, I don't do it. And that is what it is, whether it made me money or not. You have to be willing to walk away from the things that you've built when it just doesn't serve you anymore. So
yes, it's okay to have hobbies and they don't mean anything other than they're fun. You can do something for a couple of days and then never do them again. It's okay. That's such a gig economy, like being, coming of age in the recession thing that I'm unlearning, is that scarcity mindset where, money is real and money limitations are real. And, having gone through really difficult financial times during that recession, like 10 years ago, God, at one point I was working at a Cracker Barrel and a call center at the same time while doing my master's and being in an abusive relationship. That was like shitty time of my life. And if someone had come in and been like, just, you have a scarcity mentality, darling, just believe in that you can have more, I would have bitten their fucking head off. But, but it is, what did I do during that time? I did find my joy, and that joy was a thread that led me out of there. And my joy was school. And I learned philosophy and literature, and I just poured myself into that. That made me feel wonderful. I loved it. And it was for no other reason, because at that point, the economy was in such shambles that I didn't think anything could get me out of it. So I was like, you know what? I went to school to get a job and that didn't work. So I'm just going to go to school for what I love. And that's the thread that led me here, out and dug me out of that situation eventually. And it wasn't because it led to this magical job. I still don't have a job, y'all. It was just, you find yourself, you find your community, you find your opportunities through what you love. It's never through what you fear or what you hate. That's always going to be dead ends. So, any way you can, feel your fear, feel your anger, but then soothe yourself with comfort, the comforts of what you love. Those things will be the helping hands, I think.
Yeah. And I also just I don't like operating out of a place of fear. It's just really not good for me. I feel like it's not good for my skin. And I know it's like hard for people people who are in terrible situations. Like, I don't want this to sound like callous or whatever, but you have to imagine a way out, because if you don't, you're just trapped. And we don't have to live like victims, and we don't have to be trapped. And you're right, community is so important. I always tell people that like mutual aid is the most powerful thing at our disposal, being able to help each other, being able to actually say, I need help, because that's the first that we carry too, is that we can't ask for help, or we feel weak, and I'm just like, everyone struggles, and I think that that's something with like Instagram too, is like, we always see the best of people's lives. And that then gives people the opportunity. It's like, well, how is she affording Europe if things are so bad? How is she affording this? How is she affording that? It's just like,
yeah,
people,
wrong questions. Yeah. Yeah, and I've been there like the envy sets in. You're like, why can't I have that? What's wrong with me? Like, they don't understand. And I do still struggle with that, and I feel the little victim voice coming, and then I like treat it like a little child. I'm like, oh, there, have a little sandwich, you're okay.
It's okay to be curious, let's leave it alone.
Yeah. And it's particularly hard when we come from families that perpetuate that victimhood, or like once you get a little success, like there's maybe jealousy, or like the sense that like, oh, but you still, like a reminder that we still came from little, and it manifests in my family with hoarding. I know this is kind of a tangent, but it's like the hoarding is a reminder that like, oh, we're not quite okay. We have a lot, but it's too much now, and it's like, so I feel like I'm getting free, right? But then my mom will send me big smash boxes full of stuff. She can't stop doing it. She just keeps sending them. I ask her to stop. She just keeps sending them. And so I'm drowning in her fear and her lack and her, addiction to the cycle of poverty and wealth and capitalism and all that I feel like I've escaped and I found my joy. But then there's that like little reminder that like, it's still there. And so if you are in a family that reminds you all the time, or like unhealed people are in your family, like that's okay too. It's okay for you to have joy, even if your parents don't yet or ever, it starts with you and boundaries. I open the box at the foyer. I take a couple items and I donate the rest instead of drowning in it. It's just a little metaphor, I think, that I'm working with right now.
Okay, I'm really glad that you brought up the hoarding thing, because I feel like that across like the Lithian community, that's something that we do share, because I also feel like it's this place of like their inner child just having the opportunity to have all of the stuff they couldn't have at one point. And so it just brings them so much joy to have it. And then they're like, oh no, I messed up. And, they'll pass it on to you. And they're like, but I was just having this conversation about how this is a common thing. And they're like, do you think that's a common thing? I'm like, yes, I do think that that hoarding is a common thing, because it's sort of adjusting from that, like not having anything to having so much. And like, yeah, like you said, a little reminder of, oh, well, what if we need this and whatever. And there's so many things that I feel like I wish the Latino community would realize would be so much more beneficial to them, instead of operating out of that place of fear, and being worried about having conversations. And I understand where that comes from, because like it's those survival tactics, right? Like if the people in charge, the Spanish or then police officers or any type of like structure were asking questions, you could like just be like, oh no, everything's cool, everything's whatever. But it's like, we have to undo that like thought process of like, if we bring anybody in from the outside, it's going to cause issues, because the reality is that patriarchy thrives when it's like religion, government, and family are the three structures that have all the control. And I don't know, sometimes old ways die hard, and I feel like for any Latino person out there who is seeking like help for any type of like issues with their mental health, like I really do commend you, because I remember when I first started seeking that out, it was like all a joke because my parents couldn't really processing what was going on. They're like, "Are you going to kill us in the middle of the night?" I'm like, "Mom,
Oh my goodness.
like what?" And I'm like, "I don't think it's that serious. I think I'm just a little sad all the time." But it's you know, it's like, I don't know, I always say about Mexicans is that we can take nothing seriously, and therefore like nothing is serious. But everything can be, you know, serious. So it's finding that space, you know, where if you don't have that support system within your family, finding it in other places. And I'm sorry, I went on this whole tangent, but I think it's all relevant too.
To connect it back to joy, it's not about ignoring pain. And like, so our generational trauma, like all that stuff, it's all part of the joy process. We say we need help. Like I need to go to therapy. And this is something that's super stigmatized in Latinx communities, is like, you know, getting help. It means you're weak. It means you're vulnerable. That means something's wrong with you. And so the first step towards my joy was telling my parents, you know, like, I'm not totally okay with what happened growing up, and I'm going to go get therapy for it. And I'm on medicine now, and, you know, and just listening to them, you know, respond to it in ways that would trigger me before, but understanding that they're coming from an unhealed space as well, and they haven't gotten that therapy, you know. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe something is wrong with me, Mom. You know, maybe like, you know, she says, "Ay, nada te pasa, está bien." You know, like you're totally fine. You're like, that's the mentality, is like, you know, the toxic positivity is like, you're fine, even when you're not fine. No. So I think joy is honesty as well. Honesty with what's not fine.
Yeah, no, and I think that the hard thing too is like, because watching us get help for our issues also like makes them start to think it's like, well, did I have it that bad? And the reality is like, yeah, you probably did. My mom was one of 12. So there's a smorgasbord of things there, you know. But I think it's powerful because like, as I heal, I see her healing and no longer accepting some of the things. But I also just like, my sister reminds me all the time, she's like, "No vas a cambiar la cultura," you know, you're not. And I think that is important, is knowing like what your limits are in the ways that things just are set up. There's that quote that's like, personality decontextualized, you know, and it's and then like community decontextualized, and culture, and how all of these things present so many things that we've just accepted too as a way of like surviving. And I don't know. Yeah, we're just not, a lot of us are just not in that space where we want to just survive. We want to thrive. So we are decontextualizing culture and how it impacts us. And it's powerful.
Yes.
I also want to thank you, Bex, for it's okay to be a little delusional. This is the permission that I've been waiting for my entire life. And I really, really, really appreciate that. It's okay. A little delusion is going to help us find our joy. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. So I like to ask this, like, if you could slap a bumper sticker on the car of the Missing Witches Coven as we drive through the universe, what message, like what short message would you want your bumper sticker on the Missing Witches car to say?
Be gay, do crime.
Love it. Thank you. John Waters forever. John Waters is, you know, one of the patron saints of my entire life. So thank you. Be gay, do crime. The life of a heterosexual is a miserable and boring existence.
Mine would be, what would your 11-year-old self do?
Let's spend some time with our 11-year-old selves.
Or 8-year-old, whatever.
Or 8, or
yeah,
whichever that number is.
It's 11 for
And like, let's put that kid on the altar too, you know, along with the ancestors, wherever that place was where you had that childhood joy. Can talk out loud to them too, while we talk to our grandparents and our parents. All that shit that I can't really say to my parents I found ways to say by writing it first or saying it out loud in an altar or saying it to a fire. And then when the time came, it just came out in the way that it needed to, maybe the way that they could hear it, or maybe not. But I think, yeah, let's speak some joy and some joyful truth wherever we can, and especially to those little kids.
And Bex, Lorraine, I want individually to ask you, I'm sure our listeners have fallen in love with you if they hadn't already encountered your work before. So Bex, can you tell us how they can shower you with attention and abundance?
Yes, I always love abundance to just rain on me. If you found something interesting about my work, definitely you can check out my website, which is bexbcasting.com. That's also my personal Instagram and like social media handle, but I do most of my work on Tutia Bruja, their Instagram page. You can find me on TikTok. I'm always like unpacking something. It's funny. That's what I like about TikTok is I'm like, this is where we trauma dump. So I spend a lot of time on there. Also, I do in-person readings if you're in the St. Louis area at Sincerely the Craft. I'm a house witch there. If you need some advice on a spell, pop on in. I can help you. And I do virtual readings. And yeah, you can find me in all those places, or maybe just like call to the wind and there I will be.
And you can find me on Witchy Heights on Instagram. I am working on a website. I am a Luddite witch. Again, I'm an analog witch, so I'm working on it, y'all. But for now, DMing me on at Witchy Heights on Instagram is the easiest, fastest way to get to me. If you'd like to support my work, the best way at the moment is to buy a copy of BRUJAS. For those of you who are on video, here it is. Yeah, so it's in paperback now at all major booksellers or your indie bookstore. If you don't see it, please ask for it. That's always really helpful. And leaving reviews, honest reviews, I can handle it, but any review is really important for my work as I start to work on my next book. And, I'll eventually need to sell that one as well. So sell my soul. So yeah, I hope you'll follow along. I will be posting a lot more. I'll be launching a Patreon for, since I'm going into hermit mode, that will be a way that you might support my work until I emerge again.
So again, the title of the book is BRUJAS, The Magic and Power of Witches of Color by Lorraine Monteagut, and Tea Tua Bruja is the podcast by Bex Carlos. Thank you so much for being in this circle of joy and resistance and allyship and delusion. It's been a wonderful way to jump into summer, and I'm so grateful that you both joined us today.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you for being here and being so fucking rad. Blessed fucking be.
Happy Litha. Blessed fucking be.
You must be a witch.
If you want to support the Missing Witches Project, find out how at missingwitches.com. Pre-order New Moon Magic, 13 anti-capitalist tools for resistance and re-enchantment.